Hey guys, tonight we're time traveling straight into one of history's weirdest and most overlooked traditions, Halloween night in Victorian England. Imagine a world where your costume is 40% soot, 30% wool, and 100% itchy. And the biggest threat on Halloween isn't a haunted house, it's your cousin Thomas launching a rotten turnip at your skull. This is the era of suspicious apples, competitive cabbage night vandalism, and more spontaneous fire hazards than you'll find at your uncle's 4th of July barbecue. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, I want you to dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, put away your phone, unless you're using it to listen to this, and maybe tuck your toes in so they don't get nibbled by imaginary chimney sweeps. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what Halloween was like before fun-sized Snickers and polyester costumes? Did kids bob for apples? Or just for a chance at not eating boiled cabbage for dinner? Did they go door to door demanding candy? Or was it more of a, give us a potato or we redecorate your cow kind of situation? Could you survive a night with only a lantern, a potato sack, and a deeply superstitious grandmother telling you that ghosts can smell fear and unwashed socks? Would you last 5 minutes trying to trick or treat in a world where trick often meant actual property damage and treat might be an apple with the worm still inside? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in Victorian England. It's October 31st, 1876. The air smells like coal smoke and cold cabbage. Your shoes are 2 sizes too small, and you're about to experience the spookiest, weirdest, and pettiest Halloween of your new life. Good luck. You open your eyes to a bedroom that's 1 part drafty, 1 part smog. It's Halloween morning, and you're already inhaling enough coal dust to season a stew. The air is crisp, your breath visible, and someone's shouting about missing socks. Welcome to another day of Victorian existence, where spooky starts with a cold bed and an even colder breakfast. The first sensation of the day isn't excitement for Halloween, but a desperate wish that the window would close itself or that central heating existed. No such luck. Your breath curls above you in little white clouds, a daily reminder that your bed is positioned somewhere between the North Pole and the train station. You reach for your blanket, which has the insulating power of wet cardboard, and try to will yourself upright. The sheets are rough, the mattress lumpy, and you're convinced the lumps are moving. Possibly another infestation, possibly just your imagination. In Victorian England, it's sometimes hard to tell. There's no gentle alarm clock, just the sound of your youngest sibling bellowing from the next room that someone's taken his only pair of serviceable socks. This is immediately followed by your mother's voice echoing up the stairs, equal parts loving and threatening, summoning all children, pets, and possibly minor ghosts to breakfast. On Halloween, every shadow in the hallway is suspicious, but most of them are just relatives shuffling to the wash basin. You sit up, shivering, and swing your feet onto the icy floorboards. There's no carpet, unless you count the mysterious dust ruffle that used to be a family dog's blanket. Every step is a shock to the system, and you contemplate whether frostbite or missing breakfast is the greater risk. In a Victorian household, breakfast waits for no one, and the good chairs go fast. You shuffle toward the kitchen, trailing coal dust and resentment, feeling like the world's youngest, least glamorous chimney sweep. As you pass the cracked window, you get your first look at Halloween outside. The fog hangs low, thick as pudding, and every distant figure looks like a potential ghost or, worse, a neighbor. The streets glisten with last night's drizzle, and someone's already chalked a rude pumpkin face on the fence. You're not sure if it's a festive prank or just your brother's artistic protest against vegetables. Downstairs, breakfast is already underway. The kitchen is warm, but only by comparison to the rest of the house. The fire is a few embers struggling to stay awake in the hearth, and the smell is equal parts boiled bread and coal smoke. Someone's made tea so weak you can see the bottom of the cup, and the jam is mostly seeds. You grab your share, wedge yourself onto the corner of a bench, and try not to think about the fact that your socks are wet and your nose is running. It's the perfect start to a day of mischief and misery. Halloween excitement mixes uneasily with the usual morning chaos. You wonder if you'll get an apple tonight, or just the traditional handful of soot. Your sister boasts that she's going to bob for 3 apples this year, which sounds ambitious for someone who can't swim and has a mild fear of water. Meanwhile, your older brother is already plotting cabbage-based revenge on the neighbors for last year's pranks. There's talk of ghost stories after supper, but first, everyone has to survive school, chores, and the ongoing mystery of who stole the jam spoon. Answer: the cat. You finish your breakfast, if you can call it that, and return upstairs to put on another layer, because the chill never quite goes away. The day stretches out in front of you, tricks to plan, costumes to improvise, and a solid chance of getting hit in the head with a turnip before bedtime. But first, you have to navigate the spookiest challenge of all: washing your face in freezing water and pretending not to mind. Victorian Halloween hasn't even started, and you're already in survival mode. Because before the ghosts, before the lanterns, and long before the candy, the first hurdle of Halloween in Victorian England is simply making it out of bed, alive, mostly dressed, and with at least one dry sock. And, if you can manage that, the rest of the night is just a bonus. There's a particular kind of misery that can only be summoned by the sound of a Victorian breakfast being prepared, mainly because it's the exact same sound you heard at dinner, and possibly at lunch. You shuffle into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and still coughing up a bit of the morning's coal dust, and you're greeted by the scent of boiling, just boiling. It's impossible to tell if it's bread, eggs, cabbage, or some poor vegetable that's wandered in by mistake. Whatever's in the pot, it's definitely been boiled, and it's definitely not improving with time. The kitchen is a study in organized chaos. Siblings elbow their way to the table like starved wolves. Mother stands by the stove, wielding a wooden spoon like a general overseeing a particularly hopeless battlefield. She's muttering something about someone tracking mud across the clean floor, but you're more concerned with securing a seat that isn't already sticky. The family cat is stalking under the table, looking for an unguarded crust, and someone is already arguing over whose turn it is to sit next to the window, prime real estate, because it's the farthest spot from the draft. Your father, already dressed for work, sits at the head of the table with the air of a man who has accepted his culinary fate. His breakfast is a slab of dark bread that requires the jaw strength of a blacksmith, dipped in tea that's mostly hot water with a suggestion of leaf. He offers you a weak smile and a brief warning: don't let your brother near the butter. That's if there is butter. You're pretty sure there hasn't been real butter since last Christmas, but everyone keeps up the pretense. Today's special is boiled egg, singular, divided meticulously among 3 children. There's porridge, greyish and lumpy, shared out in chipped bowls. The sugar bowl contains mostly dreams and a few stubborn grains hiding at the bottom. You watch as your sister stirs hers with the solemnity of a chemist at work, then winces as she discovers a suspicious lump that may once have been a raisin or possibly a pebble. You ask your mother what's in the porridge today, and she answers, "What isn't?" which is both comforting and alarming. There are other items on the table, depending on the day's fortunes and whether the shopkeeper owed your family any favors. Sometimes there's a sliver of bacon, gone before you can blink. Sometimes it's kippers, which is just a fancy way of saying fish that smells like regret. More often, there's a parade of bread heels, spread with jam so thin it might be homeopathic, or treacle that clings to your teeth like a bad decision. Every meal is punctuated by the sound of cutlery clattering and siblings squabbling over the last potato. There are ongoing negotiations about who will have to finish the leftover cabbage from last night, which, thanks to the magic of boiling, now looks exactly like the cabbage you started with, only more depressed. Conversation revolves around the usual family politics, whose turn it is to sweep the chimney, who forgot to feed the chickens, who's responsible for the suspicious footprint on the ceiling. Through it all, Mother reigns supreme, doling out rations with military precision. She manages to keep the conversation civil, mostly by threatening to withhold pudding at supper. A threat that no child takes lightly, even if pudding sometimes just means a slightly less grey bowl of porridge. Breakfast is equal parts survival and performance art. Your little brother claims to see a ghost in the pantry, which is his excuse for avoiding the cold storage and also his way of trying to score an extra spoonful of porridge. No one buys it, but everyone pretends to consider it, because Victorian breakfast is about keeping hope alive. No matter how watery the tea, or how questionable the sausage, you eat quickly, because cold porridge sets like cement, and because the first child finished gets first pick of Halloween night's secret plans, who gets to carry the turnip lantern, who gets first crack at the apple bobbing, and who's stuck helping Grandad set up for tonight's ghost stories. By the end of breakfast, you're warm enough to brave the icy hallway, full enough to last until lunch, and determined enough to survive whatever Halloween has in store, even if you have to eat cabbage 3 more times before bed. Let's talk about costumes. You might picture Halloween as a riot of colour, sparkle, and synthetic fibres, but in Victorian England your choices are scratchy, scratchier, or a hand-me-down that spent 3 generations being reimagined. This isn't a costume party. It's an endurance test. Your morning has barely started, but it's time to suit up for a day that's equal parts chilly, itchy, and likely to end with you being mistaken for a chimney sweep even if you're not one. The first layer is the standard issue, long johns or drawers if you're lucky, made from wool or some experimental fabric that's one step removed from being a horse blanket. These undergarments have survived the laundry cycle only occasionally, and there's a distinct possibility they were last boiled with your brother's socks. That's just flavor, as far as you're concerned. You wrestle into them, every movement accompanied by the sound of static and the scent of old soap. Next comes the shirt, often a hand-me-down from an older sibling. It's got patches on the patches and buttons that never quite match. In true Victorian fashion, it's either too tight in the neck or so loose it could double as a tent. You try not to think about what caused that suspicious brown stain near the hem. If you're lucky, someone has let you borrow a waistcoat. This is a rare privilege, usually reserved for special occasions, and Halloween, with its potential for public embarrassment, just barely qualifies. Your legs are shoved into stockings or woolen leggings, the sort that make your calves look like boiled sausages, and your ankles itch in a way that no scratching can ever truly cure. Over those, knickerbockers or a skirt, depending on your assigned role in the family Halloween hierarchy. The family rule is simple. If it's clean, you wear it. If it's not, you wear it and claim it's part of your costume. But what about the actual costume? Here, Victorian innovation meets pure desperation. There's no trip to a superstore, no shiny polyester capes. Instead, you dig through the household rag pile for anything that might transform you. Want to be a ghost? Grab an old sheet, preferably one without too many holes, and hope your mother doesn't recognize her missing laundry. If you're after something spookier, a dab of soot across the cheeks turns you instantly into a phantom, or, if you smear too much, just a very tired child with poor hygiene. Creativity is both encouraged and mandatory. Your sister ties a scarf around her head and declares herself a gypsy, with all the vague historical accuracy of a parlor palm. Your older brother fashions a witch's hat from last week's newspaper, blackened with the same stove polish used on the family boots. If you're really lucky, someone unearths a mask from the back of a cupboard, a lumpy, slightly terrifying thing made of stiffened linen and paint that flakes off at the first sign of moisture. Breathing in it is optional. Some families get more ambitious. If your parents are feeling festive, You might get a potato sack with eye holes or a homemade cloak stitched from an old curtain. The trick is to look just scary enough to warrant a treat, but not so scary that you spook the chickens on the way out the door. No one wants to spend Halloween explaining to the neighbor why their prized hen is now hiding under the coal bin. Accessories are a mixed bag. A broomstick is always available, though you'll have to wrestle your siblings for the good one, the one with fewer splinters. An old belt becomes a snake, a pot lid becomes a shield, and the family dog, if you can catch it, might serve as a reluctant steed for your impromptu night costume. By the end of the dressing process, you're layered, lumpy, and already regretting every single clothing choice. You're not exactly the embodiment of your chosen character, but you are warm, protected from the October chill, and officially ready to terrify your neighbors, if only by how much lint you can collect in a single outing. As you stare at yourself in the cracked hallway mirror, you realize Halloween in Victorian England isn't about looking good. It's about surviving the night with all your toes and your dignity mostly intact. And, with a final tug at your lopsided hat, you head into the day, itchy, bundled, and ready for adventure. The walk to school on Halloween morning in Victorian England is less a commute and more a slow-motion parade of shivers, arguments, and thinly veiled ghost panic. You trudge through the fog-drenched streets, bundled in more wool than a sheep in January, one eye on your feet and one on every looming shadow. The city seems to lean in today, houses pressing closer, alleyways darker, and even the stray cats slinking along the gutters look twice as haunted. You're not alone, of course. There's a whole gaggle of children moving in the same direction, trailing sibling squabbles and elaborate plans for the evening's mischief. The bravest among you walk in the middle, surrounded by a buffer of smaller kids and the occasional cart horse. No one wants to be on the edge, near the walls, where the ghosts of murdered chimney sweeps and jilted brides are rumored to lurk. This is the morning when the usual bickering gives way to the real business of Halloween. Ghost stories. Victorian children take their supernatural lore as seriously as their chores, and everyone's got a favorite tale. As you shuffle down the lane, someone always starts with the classic, the headless lady of Pennywell Lane, who appears if you say her name 3 times, but no one ever does, at least not out loud. A chorus of shudders ripples through the group. School itself is just an old brick building with floors that creak like they're trying to confess to past crimes. The fog follows you inside, curling around your boots. The teachers, grim as the weather, try to act unimpressed, but even they eye the corners of the room more carefully today. There's an unspoken agreement. On Halloween, even the strictest schoolmistress is not above glancing over her shoulder. Before the first bell, the real lesson is in survival. Who can tell the scariest story without flinching, who can walk past the cloakroom alone, and who's brave enough to go to the lavatory in the basement, especially after someone claims to have seen the ghost of old Mr. Pettigrew, the school's former headmaster, still stalking the corridors with his wooden cane. The girls cluster near the windows, swapping tales of haunted dolls and phantom footsteps on the attic stairs. The boys, naturally, up the ante, boasting about encounters with the legendary black dog, a spectral hound that appears to children who fib to their mothers, which, by a show of hands, is apparently everyone. You listen, heart-pounding, not sure if you're scared or just cold. The stories are a mix of cautionary tales, thinly veiled warnings, and outright nonsense. One child swears her cousin saw a ghost at the pie shop, his own reflection, but still, it counts. Someone else describes seeing mysterious lights in the graveyard, and you silently vow never to take the shortcut through there again, even if it saves you 5 minutes and a run-in with Mrs. Cratchit's goose. School lessons on Halloween are a lost cause. Arithmetic gives way to ghost arithmetic. How many spirits does it take to haunt a cellar? And geography is suddenly about mapping out which alleys are most likely to harbour banshees. The teacher's attempts to restore order are half-hearted at best. After all, she remembers her own school days, whispering stories under the desk and jumping at every gust of wind. At break time, you and your friends crowd into the muddy courtyard. where the games take a distinctly supernatural turn. Someone dares you to touch the cursed tree stump by the fence. And you do, careful not to let your sleeve brush against the suspicious green moss. Someone else starts a contest to see who can do the best ghost impression. Turns out everyone just sounds like their father with a head cold. By the end of the school day, you're jittery and exhausted. Every ordinary noise, a door slamming, a window rattling, feels like it might be something from the other side. The stories swirl in your head, blending with the smell of chalk, dust, and cabbage. It's the perfect setup for a night of tricks, treats, and minor emotional trauma. But mostly, it's just another Halloween in Victorian England, where even the skeptics check under the bed, just in case. Forget everything you know about store-bought costumes. In Victorian England, Halloween attire isn't so much a trip to the shops as it is a competitive rummage through the family's most questionable collection of textiles. If you want to be something, anything on Halloween night, you'd better be able to improvise, sew, and negotiate, all while dodging your siblings and surviving your mother's running commentary on wastefulness. For most Victorian kids, the costume trunk is just a misnamed wooden box that also doubles as a bench, a footstool, and, during desperate times, a hiding place from chores. Inside is a hodgepodge of relics, fraying scarves, bits of lace, battered hats, and exactly one velvet glove that's always missing its partner. You pull out a scrap of black cloth, inspect it for suspicious stains, and declare it good enough for your Dracula-cum-cat burglar ensemble. If you find an old bonnet or top hat, you're basically upper class for the evening. Masks are another matter. There's no cheerful aisle of plastic faces. Instead, you get a slightly terrifying piece of stiffened linen or cardboard, painted with the last remnants of the household's ink supply. Breathing through these homemade creations is an exercise in faith and jaw strength. You tie it on with an old shoelace, squint through the eye holes, and try not to think about how many family noses have previously occupied the same mask. If you're feeling ambitious, or if you have a particularly creative older sister, costumes reach a new level of artistry. Perhaps a white bedsheet becomes a ghost, unless it's laundry day, in which case, the ghost is oddly striped and smells faintly of yesterday's stew. One year, someone tried to make bat wings out of a broken umbrella. It looked less like a creature of the night and more like a child fleeing a particularly aggressive laundry line, but points for effort. Soot is the go-to accessory for the true Halloween enthusiast. Just dip your fingers into the fireplace, smudge a little across your cheeks, and you're instantly transformed into anything from a zombie to a kid who fell down the coal chute, often indistinguishable in the final effect. The lucky ones get a dab of red from the remnants of last year's Christmas ribbon. Everyone else just borrows their mother's old shawl and hopes for the best. And then there's the sibling rivalry. Costumes are borrowed, swapped, and occasionally stolen in the lead-up to nightfall. A cloak you made out of an old curtain suddenly goes missing, only to reappear on your brother, who insists he found it fair and square. One enterprising child might fashion a crown from a potato sack, a broken necklace, and the family's emergency supply of tin foil, all while fending off accusations of cheating from jealous siblings. Costume politics are fierce, and negotiations often end with a truce brokered over burnt toast. Practicality is everything. Costumes must be warm enough for outdoor adventures, but not so bulky that you can't run from a cranky neighbor, or, more likely, from your own mother, if you've borrowed her good apron. The cleverest children stuff extra layers under their ghostly drapery, turning the classic sheet ghost look into a sort of Victorian thermal parka. Sure, you waddle instead of run, but you're cozy, and style points don't count when it's 3 degrees above freezing. In the end, everyone lines up for inspection in the parlor, a procession of ragtag monsters, sooty witches, tiny vampires, and 1 or 2 mystery costumes invented on the spot. The adults sigh, the cat flees, and somewhere, the family dog eyes the makeshift werewolf mask with justified terror. No one's sure exactly what anyone's supposed to be, but everyone agrees, you're ready for Halloween. Victorian Halloween costumes may not win any awards for authenticity or comfort, but they're built to survive the night, the pranks, and the November chill. Because in this era, the scariest thing isn't the ghost stories. It's having to explain to your mother why her only tablecloth now has armholes. Nothing brings a group of Victorian children together quite like the promise of bobbing for apples, a game so full of optimism, chaos, and questionable hygiene that it's a wonder anyone survived to adulthood. As dusk approaches and the first round of pranks have been executed, someone's boots hidden, a cabbage lobbed at the garden gate. The neighborhood children shuffle into a parlor or barn, breath puffing in the chilly air, anticipation building for the evening's signature event. The setup is deceptively simple. A large wooden basin, battered and slightly warped, is dragged to the center of the room. A few apples, all of which have seen better days, are tossed in, some so battered they practically float out of sympathy. The water, drawn from the cold tap or well, is icy enough to make your teeth ache just looking at it. If you're lucky, the water is relatively clean, but more often than not, it has a faint, mysterious color that defies explanation and should probably be left unexamined. This is, after all, Victorian England. If it's not moving, it's probably fine. The rules are simple and universally ignored. You put your hands behind your back, kneel, or are forcibly pushed, to the rim of the tub and attempt to capture an apple using only your teeth. The older kids crowd around, heckling and egging each other on. It's the most fun you can have with a fruit and a questionable immune system. Your nose is instantly numb, your cheeks bright red, and your hair wet enough to drip into your collar, adding a soggy chill to your collection of discomforts. There is always at least one overachiever who goes after the apple with the confidence of a hungry terrier. He plunges face first, water sloshing over the sides, emerging triumphantly with an apple clamped between his teeth and 3/4 of the neighborhood's germs. Everyone cheers, partly out of admiration, partly in relief that it wasn't their turn next. Your own attempt is less triumphant. After several embarrassing lunges and a near drowning, you manage to pin an apple to the bottom with your nose. You emerge, dripping and triumphant, clutching a bruised apple that tastes faintly of childhood and a little bit like soap. As the line progresses, the water gets murkier and the apples more battered. The youngest children mostly end up soaked, eyes wide and streaming, with only vague memories of what apples actually taste like. There's always one child who swears the floating apple winked at him, and the older kids immediately turn this into a new ghost story for future Halloweens. Beware the apple of doom, last seen by the kid who now has a cold. Adults look on, equal parts amused and appalled, occasionally reminding the children not to swallow any water unless you fancy a fortnight off school. Hygiene, such as it is ignored for the sake of tradition. The family cat appears, sniffs the basin, and wisely flees. Someone's mother mutters about wasting good apples, though the apples themselves might object to being called good. As the last participant takes their soggy, shivering turn, the tub is finally tipped out, preferably in the garden, where it immediately forms a new ecosystem. The game ends with everyone dabbing at their faces with the family's shared towel, which is now wetter and somehow dirtier than before. If you're lucky, you'll find a dry patch. If not, you just add mildly damp to the list of adjectives describing your Halloween attire. Despite the risk of catching a chill, or perhaps because of it, bobbing for apples is always a highlight. There's a simple thrill to dunking your head into cold water for a taste of victory and whatever else might be floating in there. For a brief moment, the laughter drowns out the howling wind, and the memory of cold breakfasts and itchy costumes fades. This is Halloween, Victorian style. Unsanitary, unfiltered, and unforgettable. And as you wipe water from your eyes and bite into your hard-won apple, you feel, just for a moment, truly alive. Or at least, as alive as anyone can feel after swallowing half a pint of shared Victorian bathwater. Before pumpkins became the Instagram celebrities of Halloween, the undisputed monarch of spooky decor in Victorian England was the humble turnip. That's right. If you wanted to make a lantern, you didn't reach for a cheerful orange gourd. You grabbed the nearest gnarly, slightly muddy root vegetable and prepared yourself for an hour of dangerous, slippery carving. Forget cozy pumpkin patches. This is a game of blisters, stubbed thumbs, and the lingering smell of mashed root. It all begins with a trip to the kitchen garden, or, for city dwellers, a hasty rummage through the vegetable bin. The best turnips for lanterns are the ones nobody wants to eat. Lumpy, oversized, and as hard as Victorian math homework. With a handful of rusty kitchen knives and one wildly optimistic spoon, you and your siblings claim your roots and start hacking away. Everyone insists they have a secret technique, which usually involves just attacking the thing with reckless abandon until either the turnip gives way or your will to live does. The first challenge is removing the top. No easy task when your knife is as blunt as last year's bread. Next, you scoop out the insides, discovering that a raw turnip has about the same texture and smell as a cold bath after gym class. The table fills with pale shavings, errant seeds, and the kind vegetable sludge that even the family dog won't touch. Your mother sighs audibly at the mess, but says nothing. She knows better than to get between a child and their spooky ambitions. Carving the face is where true artistry, or at least comedy, emerges. Victorian turnip lanterns aren't known for their beauty. Some come out genuinely terrifying. Jagged mouths, triangular eyes, and an overall expression of existential dread that perfectly matches your own when you remember the state of your math homework. Others look like potatoes after a bad night. Still, everyone oohs and ahs, pretending each creation is a masterpiece, while secretly ranking the ugliest for future blackmail material. Once your lantern is done, meaning you've lost sensation in your hands, it's time for the candle. You stuff the stub of a tallow candle or a chunk of wax into the hollowed center, struggling to keep it upright. Victorian candles are infamous for burning with all the consistency of an angry squirrel. One minute, your lantern is a beacon of Halloween pride. The next, it's coughing up smoke and threatening to ignite the family tablecloth. If you're lucky, you'll make it through the night without setting anything ablaze, but nobody makes any promises. Finally, you jam a bit of string or a stick through the top to carry your lantern around. The lanterns are paraded outside, held aloft as a badge of courage and proof of your willingness to risk tetanus for a night of mild terror. They cast weird, flickering shadows on walls and fences, and, if you're lucky, scare at least one unsuspecting neighbor's cat into making a new home in the next parish. No two turnip lanterns are alike, and part of the fun is in comparing whose vegetable ended up the most gruesome or whose candle lasted past bedtime. There's always one cousin who swears his lantern is haunted, claiming it winked at him from across the room. You suspect he just poked an extra hole, but you play along because that's half the fun. The parade of lanterns down the lane is a sight to behold. A wobbly procession of children, each holding a snarling, hollow-eyed vegetable that looks like it's plotting revenge for being picked last in the garden. The glow of dozens of tiny, flickering lights cuts through the autumn fog, casting faces in strange relief and making every shadow feel like the beginning of a new ghost story. And as you march, giggling and shivering, through the streets or along the hedgerows, you realize that sometimes the simplest traditions, especially the ones that leave your hands sore and your house smelling like soup, are the ones that make Halloween truly unforgettable. Even if, in the morning, you find a chewed-up turnip on the doorstep and swear you hear it whisper your name, as twilight crawls across the rooftops and the first stars blink awake, Victorian children everywhere begin to vibrate with barely contained chaos. This is not just Halloween night, this is mischief night, a sacred evening when every household becomes a battleground, every fence a target, and every adult a potential adversary. In a world without television, TikTok, or even reliable plumbing, prank-based mayhem is the purest form of childhood entertainment. Preparation for mischief night starts weeks in advance. The cleverest children, and the ones with the least supervision, spend hours plotting. They trade whispered strategies behind hedges and swap recipes for homemade itching powder. Hint, it's just sawdust, but no one tell the younger kids. Even the least imaginative child can contribute, usually by standing lookout or distracting Mrs. Butterworth as her cabbage patch mysteriously thins. When the clock strikes dusk, you gather your supplies. This is a no-frills operation, a lump of soap for window scribbling, a pocketful of string for tying doorknobs together, and an ancient, battered turnip for launching at your least favorite neighbor's door. Soot and flour are classics, but the truly ambitious might attempt the legendary upturned bucket of water on the doorstep, a move that will go down in family history if successful and local infamy if not. The first targets are always the most obvious: your own house. It's an unwritten rule. You prank your family before anyone else gets the chance. Your older brother locks the parlor door and insists he saw a rat, while your little sister replaces the sugar with salt and sits quietly, waiting for someone to ruin their tea. The real prize, though, is catching a parent off guard. There's nothing like the sound of your father, normally composed, yelping as his boots squelch with hidden cabbage. Outside, the real games begin. Bands of children roam the cobbled streets, eyes gleaming in the lantern light, hands full of mud balls and hearts full of mischief. Gates are rattled, knockers banged, and more than one pile of firewood finds itself rearranged in the shape of a rather suggestive pumpkin. You're careful to avoid the houses where the grown-ups are mean, or, worse, the ones who actually enjoy joining in and double your workload by pranking you right back. The bravest among you tackle the ultimate prank, swapping the neighbor's laundry. There is no finer display of skill and daring than hanging Mr. Tompkins' enormous undergarments in Mrs. Green's yard. It's a political act, a social commentary, and a guaranteed topic for gossip until Christmas. Of course, the risk is immense. Be spotted, and you'll be scrubbing floors until next Halloween. But oh, the glory. Mischief Night has its unwritten rules. Never do permanent damage, never prank the vicar unless you're extremely fast. And if someone cries, the game is over, unless it's your sibling, in which case, toughen up. Most pranks are harmless, swapping signs, switching shoes, or sticking notes that say "kick me" to unsuspecting backs. A select few are brilliant in their simplicity, like sneaking a frog into the wash basin or placing a fake spider on the breadboard. Of course, there are failures. The bucket tips over on your own shoes, the doorbell string snaps and whips you in the face, and sometimes you get caught mid-throw, facing the stern glare of Mrs. Peabody, who will absolutely tell your mother. But that's the thrill of Mischief Night. The line between legend and laundry duty is razor thin. By the time the church bell tolls for supper, your hands are filthy, your clothes are muddier, and your heart is lighter. You regroup with your friends to compare loot, half a turnip, a button, and 3 mysterious pebbles, swap stories of triumph and disaster, and try not to look too smug as your parents try, and fail, to figure out who replaced the family cat's collar with a string of boiled sweets. In the end, Mischief Night is less about the pranks and more about the memories, the laughter echoing down the alleyways, the thrill of a perfectly executed soap drawing, and the knowledge that, just for tonight, you got away with a little bit of harmless chaos. Victorian childhood at its absolute finest. If you thought pranks peaked with soap on windows and strings across doorways, you've never witnessed the glory of Cabbage Night, a Victorian Halloween tradition that takes vandalism, stirs in some questionable produce, and lets chaos simmer all night long. This is the Super Bowl of vegetable warfare. If you are lucky enough to wake up on November 1st without cabbage on your roof, you either made powerful friends or you were the one hurling them. The spirit of Cabbage Night is simple. Find a vegetable that smells suspicious, is slightly squishy, and has already lost its bid for the family stew pot. Cabbage is the weapon of choice, heavy enough to do damage, light enough to lob over a fence, and, in its autumn glory, impressively pungent. Other contenders make occasional appearances. The occasional turnip, a wilted carrot, or a potato so old it might qualify for a pension. But nothing says Halloween like a flying cabbage head. Preparation begins at dusk. As children scurry to hidden vegetable caches, behind every hedgerow and beneath every porch lurks a secret arsenal of rejected garden bounty. You survey your cabbage haul like a general preparing for battle, selecting only the finest specimens for your mission. There's always one child who brings an absolute monster, a cabbage so enormous and fragrant that carrying it is an act of courage, or at least poor judgment. The opening salvo is always the loudest. 1 minute. All is quiet in the chilly night. The next, a resounding thud echoes through the neighborhood as the first cabbage hits a door, a gate, or, on a particularly ambitious toss, the local grocer's cart. Children squeal with glee, adults groan, and dogs lose their collective minds. For a brief, magical window, the whole street is alive with flying greens. But there's more to Cabbage Night than raw chaos. The true art is in the strategy. Should you aim for the roof-guaranteed noise, delayed cleanup, the doormat, maximum squish, high risk of parental retaliation, or the windowsill rare, advanced, often punished by an angry mother? Some teams form alliances. One child distracts the grown-ups, another lines up the shot, and a third keeps lookout for the local constable, who is never amused and always 2 steps behind. The carnage accumulates quickly. By midnight, doors are streaked with cabbage juice, gardens are littered with stalks, and the air is thick with the aroma of righteous mischief. The truly legendary pranksters aim for the weather vane or the top of the coal shed. Landing a cabbage there is the stuff of neighborhood legend, the sort of story you'll retell every Halloween until you're old enough to be annoyed by it yourself. Of course, things do go wrong. Sometimes a cabbage splits prematurely, showering everyone within 6 feet in smelly shards. Occasionally, a misfire takes out someone's carefully carved turnip lantern, sparking a vegetable-based feud that lasts until Christmas. And woe to the child who can't throw straight. There's always one who lands a cabbage squarely on the local policeman's hat, instantly regretting every life choice up to that moment. As the night winds down, families emerge with lanterns and brooms, surveying the battlefield. Some shake their fists, others laugh, and a few just sigh and add cabbage soup to tomorrow's menu. But no one is really angry. Cabbage Night is a rite of passage, a chance for children to let off steam, for parents to remember their own misspent youth, and for the entire community to bond over the simple pleasure of hurling something mildly rotten at someone else's house. And so, as you trudge home with cabbage stains on your hands and a heroic tale on your lips, you know you've played your part in a grand, ridiculous tradition. In the world of Victorian Halloween, you might not have candy, but you do have memories. Messy, fragrant, and absolutely unforgettable. If bobbing for apples is the unofficial bath of Victorian Halloween, then apple snapping is its Olympic event, a game that tests not only your coordination but your willingness to risk your teeth in the pursuit of fleeting glory. Forget dentist appointments and modern orthodontics. This is the Victorian era, where the only dental plan is don't fall face first into the hearth, And apple snapping is here to remind you that every bite is a gamble. The game is deceptively simple, as all the best forms of mischief tend to be. Somewhere in the parlor or out in the barn, an adult with questionable judgment ties a length of twine across the room, or from beam to beam. Apples, fresh if you're lucky and distinctly vintage if you're not, are attached at intervals. The goal: hands behind your back. You lunge, snap, and try to grab an apple with just your mouth. No hands allowed, no cheating, and absolutely no complaining if you end up eating more string than fruit. The apples themselves are the stars of the show, and not in a flattering way. Some are small and rock hard, others mealy and bruised. A few may have spent one Halloween too many rolling around the bottom of the pantry. Still, nothing will deter a Victorian child on the hunt for a treat, especially one that doesn't taste of cabbage. There's a murmur of anticipation as the first volunteer steps up, neck craned, mouth open, arms flailing like a penguin on roller skates. The crowd cheers or jeers, depending on family tradition. It quickly becomes apparent that apple snapping is harder than it looks. The apples swing with every lunge, dodging your teeth, bonking your nose, or spinning just out of reach as your cousins laugh themselves silly. The apples are slick. The string is slippery. And half the fun is watching your siblings come away with red cheeks and slightly bruised dignity. The lucky few manage to clamp down on an apple, earning applause, bragging rights, and probably a splinter or two. Meanwhile, there are always casualties. Someone gets overzealous and ends up with a face full of string, or worse, manages to take an apple to the forehead. Occasionally, a loose tooth is claimed by the game, later displayed with pride and a bit of tissue. More than one child spends the evening grumbling about sore gums, but secretly hoping for another go. Victorian dental work is mostly homegrown anyway. If you're missing a tooth, you just whistle louder during ghost stories. The chaos doesn't end with apples, variations abound. Sometimes the game master, usually a mischievous uncle or an older sibling with a love of slapstick, swaps in a potato for extra difficulty. A parsnip makes an appearance, prompting shrieks and a new round of wild, tooth-endangering attempts. In some households, a rare coin is tied alongside the apples, turning the game into a madcap mix of Halloween and amateur banking. Just try not to swallow your winnings. Parents hover in the background, alternately wincing and egging everyone on, occasionally warning about chipped teeth, but knowing that cautionary tales won't stand up against the allure of sugar and triumph. It's all in good fun, and at least half the adults are former champions, now slightly more concerned about their own dental futures. By the end of the night, everyone's hair is a mess, faces sticky, and there's a general sense of accomplishment, or at least survival. The apples that survive the ordeal are triumphantly divided, shared, and devoured. For a moment, you forget about itchy costumes and cabbage-based warfare. You have a jaw that aches and a heart that's light. In the Victorian world, where treats are rare and challenges are many, apple snapping is the purest form of happiness. A little pain, a lot of laughter, and memories to chew over long after the last string is untied. If breakfast was a colourless parade of boiled misery, Halloween supper in Victorian England tries very hard to make up for it, with mixed results. This is the meal children have been daydreaming about all week, fueled by legends of treats and whispers of sweets. In practice, the feast is a carefully orchestrated combination of whatever is left in the pantry, a few closely guarded delicacies, and a mandatory sprinkling of coal dust for atmosphere. Preparation for the Halloween feast begins early, as mothers and grandmothers descend on the kitchen like a flock of anxious crows. Ovens groan, pans clang, and clouds of flour drift through the air as children are firmly shooed away from every useful surface. There's a distinct air of excitement, partly because anything is better than boiled turnip, and partly because there's a rumor that someone's aunt once made actual cake. The centerpiece of the meal is usually a great pot of stew, bubbling away with an ingredient list that's both flexible and secretive. Nobody asks too many questions. As long as it's hot, filling, and doesn't move, it's considered a victory. Alongside the stew are crusts of bread, sometimes fancied up with a smear of drippings or a glistening coat of treacle. You eat with your fingers crossed, hoping to avoid the piece that's been lurking at the bottom since Michaelmas. But tonight, there's more. This is the one evening when treats appear, modest by modern standards, but the stuff of legend in the Victorian home. Soul cakes are passed around, small and sturdy, sweetened just enough to hint at luxury. Some are round, some a bit lopsided, but all are stamped with a cross and a prayer for the dearly departed. If you're lucky, you snag a second one when no one's looking, a tiny act of rebellion that feels riskier than cabbage throwing. Parkin cake, a sticky, ginger-laden square beloved in the north, might make an appearance, crumbling under your fork and gluing itself to your teeth for hours. There's nut loaf, too, if the autumn was generous and the family squirrely enough to hide some hazelnuts from the neighbor's children. And everywhere, bowls of roasted seeds, pumpkin if you're posh, sunflower if you're sensible, and mystery seeds if you're living dangerously. Sweet things are rare and thus revered. Treacle toffee is the ultimate prize, made in a pan so ancient it could double as an archaeological find. The toffee is poured out on a slate slab and shattered with the family rolling pin, resulting in irregular chunks that stick to your molars with enough tenacity to last through the next school term. The rule is simple. If you can chew it without losing a tooth, you get a second piece. No Victorian feast would be complete without a little burnt sugar. There's always someone, an enthusiastic cousin or an optimistic father, who decides to make sugar shapes in the fire. The results range from delicately caramelized lumps to outright cinders, but it hardly matters. You bite into your burnt sugar, pretending it's just the way you like it, because you know better than to complain when real sweetness is on offer. The meal is noisy and chaotic, punctuated by the clatter of cutlery and the occasional shriek as someone finds a pebble in their seed cake. Ghost stories are swapped between bites, with children crowding closer to the hearth, sticky-fingered and wide-eyed. The grown-ups pretend to be above it all, but their plates are just as full of treats and just as quickly emptied. By the end of supper, the house is filled with the combined smells of stew, smoke, and slightly scorched sugar. Bellies are full, hearts are lighter, and everyone agrees that tonight the food tastes like a small, stubborn victory. It might not be a banquet, but on Halloween in Victorian England, it feels like a feast fit for a king. If the king didn't mind a little soot in his pudding. Once the last sticky crumb of parkin cake is pried from your teeth, and the parlour is full of the smell of burnt sugar and wood smoke, the evening's true entertainment can begin, the ghost hunt. In Victorian England, it's not Halloween unless at least one person claims to have seen something supernatural. And the more candles you burn, the more likely it is that Uncle Herbert will insist he's been haunted since 1842. Ghost hunting is a family affair, part ritual, part performance, and wholly necessary for an authentic Halloween. It starts with the solemn lighting of candles. The family dog is promptly banished outside after last year's phantom incident involving a toppled candelabra and a singed tail. Shadows leap across the wallpaper, lending every corner a menacing air. This is when the bravest children begin scouting the house for ghosts, lantern in hand, nerves held together by the thinnest thread of bravado. The hunt is officially led by the oldest sibling, who arms themselves with a poker or perhaps a rolled-up newspaper, just in case the ghost is allergic to stern Victorian discipline. The rest of the group fans out, covering every hallway and closet with the kind of thoroughness usually reserved for looking for lost buttons. Each floorboard creak and window rattle is seized upon as evidence. That was not the wind, someone whispers, as the wind whistles obligingly through a crack in the eaves. No wardrobe is left unchecked, no curtain undisturbed. The attic is a crowd favourite, despite, or perhaps because of, the tales that it's haunted by the tragic spirit of Cousin Thomas, who once got locked up there for eating all the mince pies. The family cat, sensing an opportunity for drama, leaps from behind a trunk, and is instantly accused of being a witch's familiar. Grandmother, watching from her rocking chair, mutters that when she was a child, the ghosts at least had the decency to appear properly headless. Ghost hunting isn't just about scaring each other. It's a masterclass in Victorian imagination. Every crack in the wallpaper becomes a ghostly face. Every moth-eaten shawl is a spectral shroud, and every odd smell is, without fail, blamed on the supernatural. Even the adults get swept up in the game. Father insists he saw the curtain move, while Mother swears she felt a cold spot in the pantry. Never mind the drafty window she refuses to fix. Then come the stories, traded in whispers by candlelight. Uncle Herbert is the reigning champion, able to make even a creaking stair sound like a message from beyond. His tales are punctuated by dramatic pauses and the occasional rattling of chains, conveniently provided by his own pocket watch and a vivid imagination. The children clutch their knees and hang on every word, eyes wide, not sure whether to laugh or hide. Inevitably, someone gets too frightened and demands to sit on Mother's lap, while another claims to see a face in the window. The tension builds until the youngest child, always the wild card, suddenly yells "Boo!" and sends half the family leaping out of their skins. For a brief moment, chaos reigns, candles teeter, tea sloshes, and the family ghost hunt teeters on the edge of disaster. By the end of the night, the house is still standing. Most of the candles are still burning, and nobody can agree whether the ghost of Cousin Thomas was really present, or if it was just the cat again. Everyone is exhausted, exhilarated, and just a bit more superstitious than they were at supper. As the lanterns are snuffed out and the family shuffles off to bed, you know the ghost hunt is a success, not because you caught a spirit, but because, for one magical evening, the whole house believed in something a little beyond the ordinary. That, after all, is the real spirit of Victorian Halloween. A night when shadows are deeper, stories are wilder, and even the draft feels haunted. The moment supper is done, and the ghost stories have subsided to a low simmer of whispered speculation, the night's most eagerly anticipated adventure begins. The door-knocking ritual. Victorian children don't just wait for candy, they go out and try to extract it from their neighbours, armed with determination, tattered costumes, and enough questionable rhymes to haunt the entire block for weeks. You bundle up against the October chill, clutching your homemade lantern, turnip, not pumpkin, this is England after all, and join your friends as you melt into the drifting fog. The older children take the lead, rehearsing the lines they'll chant at each door. The bravest among you carries the emergency potato, an all-purpose prop for both tricking and treating, as needed. Knocking on doors is a community event, but it's also a test of nerve and social dexterity. The first house is always the hardest. You crowd onto the stoop, shoving each other with equal parts, excitement and anxiety. The bravest one raps sharply on the door, and everyone else shuffles their feet and tries to remember the rhyme. Soul, soul, for a soul cake, I pray. Good missus, a soul cake. The tune is warbled and the rhythm never quite right, but the sincerity is undeniable. For a moment, the grown-ups on the other side of the door are faced with a gaggle of dirty-faced children, staring up with huge eyes and high hopes, all trying to look as innocent as one can while wearing a lopsided soot mask. Sometimes, the door opens to a neighbor who's been waiting with a basket of apples, a few roasted chestnuts, or the legendary soul cake. If you're really lucky, you might get a square of parkin or a chunk of burnt toffee. Treasures to be hoarded and eaten slowly before your siblings notice. Other times, you're offered nothing but a stern look and a lecture on not bothering decent folk at this hour. If you leave empty-handed, tradition demands you mutter a curse or threaten a mild trick, like rearranging the garden gnomes or hanging a cabbage from the gate. Victorian door-knocking is part performance, part negotiation, and all chaos. Some neighbours expect a song or a recitation, worse, a dance. If you can carry a tune, you're in demand, passed from house to house with demand for another round. Those less musically gifted simply stand at the back and hope to avoid attention, occasionally chiming in with an off-key thank you when a treat is secured. Of course, there's an element of danger. Some households take a strict view on after-dark visitors. The local constable is always on the prowl, ready to break up gatherings and threaten children with dire consequences for public nuisance. There's a whispered story that last year, old Mrs. Puddlewick dumped a basin of water on the entire trick-or-treating crowd, a lesson that has become local legend, and a warning to approach her stoop with caution or a waterproof cloak. Despite the risks, door-knocking is a highlight of the night. Children race from house to house, their lanterns bobbing in the mist, calling out greetings and laughter that echo down cobbled streets. Rival groups pass each other, trading boasts about their loot or warnings about grumpy neighbors. The night becomes a patchwork of voices, footsteps, and the occasional clatter of a potato rolling into a drain. Every haul is counted, every treat divided, and every insult or trick is recounted with increasing drama as the night goes on. You feel the cold bite your cheeks, your fingers sticky with treacle or clutching a warm chestnut. And you know this is what Halloween is meant to feel like. A night of possibility, camaraderie, and mild threats disguised as rhymes. By the end of the ritual, you've collected a lumpy handful of the neighborhood's best offerings, endured a few refusals, and survived the gauntlet of song, dance, and potential soaking. Door-knocking in Victorian England isn't just about the treats, it's about bravery, creativity, and making sure everyone on the street remembers your name. If not for your costume, then at least for that mysterious potato left on their doorstep. Just when you think your teeth have survived apple snapping and your dignity has recovered from door-knocking, it's time for another beloved Victorian Halloween tradition, ducking for nuts. Part carnival game, part dental hazard, and all chaos, this after-dark contest is less about actually winning a nut and more about proving your worth to your friends and providing free entertainment for the adults who gather around with steaming mugs and an appetite for slapstick. The setup is almost comically simple. Someone fetches a shallow basin, often the same one used earlier for bobbing apples, still suspiciously damp and now slightly sticky. Into this goes a random assortment of nuts, walnuts, hazelnuts, and the odd almond if you're in a particularly posh neighborhood. Occasionally, someone throws in a hard candy or a marble just to keep things interesting and potentially dangerous. The rules, if you can call them that, are classic Victorian. Hands behind your back, face first into the basin, and absolutely no complaining about the temperature of the water or the general squishiness of the bottom. The adults, hovering in the background, offer encouragement. Don't be shy, and the occasional threat, mind the tablecloth, or it's the coal scuttle for you. One by one, children take their turn. The first brave soul lunges in, eyes squeezed shut, and emerges seconds later with a nut triumphantly clenched in their teeth, or, more likely, with water streaming down their cheeks and a look of mild betrayal. The nuts, being round and devious, roll away at the last second, or bob just out of reach as everyone cheers, groans, and offers advice that's only half helpful. Go left. No, your other left. By the third round, the water is a swirl of floating shells, bits of lint, and probably a stray raisin from supper. Nobody minds. In Victorian England, hygiene takes a back seat to tradition. And tonight, no one is above a little communal dunking for the sake of fun. Siblings sabotage each other with strategic splashes, and even the shyest cousin is coaxed into trying, egged on by the promise of a roasted chestnut or the rare glory of being declared nut champion for the year. Of course, not every turn is a triumph. There's always someone who comes up with nothing but a mouthful of water and disappointment, or worse, manages to knock the entire basin off the table in their enthusiasm. The resulting flood is met with howls of laughter and hurried mopping from an exasperated aunt who mutters about every year the same mess. The family dog appears, nose twitching, hoping to snatch a fallen hazelnut before being shooed away for interfering with the sacred ritual. The game isn't without its hazards. A misjudged lunge can leave you with a nut wedged in a place only the local apothecary can help with. An extra sharp walnut might give you a new appreciation for your one remaining baby tooth. But for every splutter, slip, or sputter, there's twice as much laughter. In the flickering candlelight, you feel a wild joy that has nothing to do with prizes and everything to do with being young, fearless, and slightly soggy. As the game goes on, competition heats up. Sibling rivalries reignite, bets are made, and every successful bite is met with applause. The last nut is finally captured by the quiet cousin who nobody expected to win and is instantly crowned with the nearest, least damp hat. It's a minor victory, but in a household of so many small defeats, burnt pudding, itchy socks, cabbage on the roof, it feels enormous. By the end, the floor is wet, the basin is empty, and the room is filled with the happy chaos of Halloween night. There are stories to retell of daring dives and unlikely triumphs, and sticky hands to be washed, if anyone can find the soap. Ducking for nuts may leave you wetter than you started, but it's the kind of old-fashioned fun that makes you forget the cold and remember, for just a little while, that being a Victorian child meant finding joy in even the simplest of games. By the time the clock creeps toward what Victorians optimistically call bedtime, the streets and parlours are teeming with mischief. Kids are wound up on burnt sugar, adrenaline, and pure tradition, launching cabbages, chanting door-knocking rhymes, and daring each other to brave the haunted corners of the house. It's the high point of Halloween. But before total anarchy can break loose, an opposing force emerges from the shadows. The parental patrol. You'll spot them everywhere tonight. Mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, and the occasional stern-faced grandmother who once chased off a pack of pranksters with nothing but her rolling pin and a glare. The parental patrol is equal parts security detail, referee, and reluctant participant. Their mission is simple: keep the chaos fun but not catastrophic, and ensure that everyone returns with all the fingers and dignity they started the evening with. They are masters of subtle surveillance. No matter how sneaky you think you are, you'll look up to find a parent lurking by the lamplight, arms crossed, lips pursed, waiting to catch you in the act. If you're swapping boots with your cousin, odds are your mother saw the whole thing from behind the curtains. If you're sneaking out for one last raid on the neighbor's cabbage patch, an uncle is already trailing you, pretending he's just out for some fresh air. Intervention tactics vary widely. Some parents deploy the classic stern warning, delivered with the authority of a royal proclamation. If I see one more turnip in the well, so help me. Others favor the direct extraction method, a swift collar, grab, and a lecture about the dangers of falling into the duck pond in your Sunday best. There are always a few who prefer the distract and redirect approach, suddenly producing a tray of roasted chestnuts or a spontaneous ghost story to corral the wildest pranksters. Yet, for all their efforts, the parental patrol walks a fine line. Halloween is supposed to be mischievous, after all. Secretly, many of them cherish these nights as much as the children do. You'll catch a father suppressing a grin as he confiscates a homemade stink bomb, or a mother hiding a laugh when she discovers her shoes filled with cold porridge. Sometimes the sternest grown-ups are the very ones who slipped a frog into your lunchbox when they were young. Still, the patrol has its limits. The truly unruly are issued the ultimate threat: early bedtime. Keep it up, and it's lights out before the last story, your mother warns, sending chills through the room that no ghost tale ever could. The older children, wise in the ways of Halloween, know how to push just to the edge, never quite toppling the family's patience, but never entirely giving up the thrill of the prank. On the street, parental alliances form. Neighbors exchange knowing glances, silently agreeing to keep an eye on each other's offspring, and trade stories about whose child ended up with the most flour on their head. The constable, an honorary member of the patrol, does his rounds with an exaggerated sigh, muttering about children these days while secretly pocketing the occasional soul cake. Inevitably, there are moments when the patrol lets their guard down. Someone's father joins the game, chasing the kids around with a broom, only to trip over a cabbage and provide a story that will last until next Halloween. An aunt forgets her mission entirely, dissolving into giggles during the ducking for nuts contest. For one glorious night, the line between child and grown-up blurs. By the end of the evening, the parental patrol's work is done. The worst of the chaos is gently reined in. The casualties, mostly bruised egos and mashed vegetables, are accounted for, and everyone is ushered home with threats of baths and warm milk. The parents hang up their lanterns, count their children, and, just for a moment, bask in the peculiar joy of a job well done, because in the end, Victorian Halloween is about both sides of the story. The wild, breathless excitement of childhood pranks, and the steady, watchful love of those determined to keep the magic just safe enough to survive another year. After a long evening of mayhem, mischief, and mystery, Victorian Halloween still has one last trick up its soot-stained sleeve: fortune-telling. In parlours across England, the fires burn low, candles flicker, and children and adults alike gather for a final ritual that promises to peer into the future with little more than household scraps and wild imagination. For one night, everyone gets to be a mystic, or at least a dramatic guesser, with a talent for interpreting questionable signs. The tools of the trade are as humble as everything else in the Victorian home. There's no crystal ball, just a chipped teacup, a bent spoon, and whatever you can fish out of the larder. The most famous Halloween fortunes are matters of love and marriage, and few games stir up more excitement or nervous giggles than these. The simplest ritual involves peeling an onion in one long, unbroken strip. If you manage it, you're destined to find true love, or at the very least, impress your relatives with your fine motor skills. Some families favor the egg white in water method. You crack an egg into a glass and watch as the white twists and coils, forming mysterious shapes. Is that a ship, a wedding ring, or just an alarming resemblance to Aunt Mildred's poodle? Every onlooker has a different opinion, and arguments break out as future marriages, travels, and careers are all predicted with great seriousness, at least until someone's laughter derails the solemnity. Another classic involves naming hazelnuts after the objects of your affection and tossing them into the fire. If your nut burns steadily, your love is true. If it pops or cracks, heartbreak is on the horizon. This tradition is equal parts drama and disaster, since an overzealous toss can send hot embers flying, sending siblings shrieking for cover and earning you a stern look from whichever parent is closest to the hearth. The grown-ups are never left out of the fun. Mothers reminisce about the fortunes they received as girls, usually involving shadowy figures in candlelit mirrors, midnight walks through the orchard, and secret suitors revealed by the shape of a candle's drip. Some insist that if you stare into a darkened mirror at midnight, you'll glimpse your future spouse's face peering over your shoulder. Children try it, only to run screaming when their own reflection, or a mischievous brother, looms out of the darkness. Not all fortunes are about love, though. There are games for luck and prosperity, too. Apple seeds are pressed to the forehead, and whichever one sticks the longest is said to predict wealth, wisdom, or longevity, though most just fall off and stick to the dog instead. Melted lead, dripped into water, forms bizarre sculptures that everyone takes turns interpreting, with each new blob spun into a hopeful tale. That one's definitely a crown, which means I'll be king, or at least get the biggest slice of pudding. The most dramatic fortunes are reserved for the boldest children, those who brave the back garden at midnight, armed with nothing but a lantern and a slice of bread. Legend says, if you circle the garden 3 times in silence, You'll hear your future whispered on the wind. Most return reporting nothing but goosebumps, and the sense that the neighbor's cat is plotting their demise. What ties all these traditions together is the feeling of shared suspense and wonder. The predictions are silly, the tools are simple, but for a few magical minutes, everyone in the room believes in possibilities, romantic, lucky, or just bizarre. The laughter, the gasps, the gentle teasing as fortunes are read aloud, all combine to create a sense of warmth and hope that's more precious than any actual prophecy. So, as the last fortunes are told and the final nut burns away, you realize that Victorian Halloween isn't just about tricks and treats. It's about gathering together in the firelight, daring to imagine the future, and finding a little magic in the ordinary onion peels, egg whites, and all. Halloween in Victorian England wouldn't be complete without the final, fiery spectacle, the neighborhood bonfire. When you're a child in an era where lighting is usually a single smoky candle and fireworks are considered both entertainment and mild artillery, the sudden appearance of a massive, crackling fire in the middle of a muddy field feels like pure, unsupervised magic. The excitement starts as soon as dusk settles. Children parade through the streets carrying their lopsided turnip lanterns, the glow barely piercing the thick autumn fog. In back gardens and public greens, piles of wood, old furniture, and the odd broken wheelbarrow mysteriously appear. No one asks too many questions about where it all came from. If it burns, it's welcome. Adults do their best to supervise. But mostly they stand back, clutching mugs of tea or something stronger, pretending they're in charge while quietly hoping nothing catches fire that shouldn't. The honor of lighting the bonfire usually goes to the oldest or bravest kid, armed with a spluttering match and cheered on by a wild chorus of friends. There's a moment of breathless anticipation. Will the kindling catch? Will it fizzle? Followed by triumphant roars as the flames leap skyward. Instantly, faces glow orange, and everyone presses closer, as much for warmth as for the spectacle. The bonfire transforms the cold, foggy night into a place of flickering shadows, laughter, and ghost stories retold in the smoky glow. And then come the fireworks, depending on how lenient or oblivious the local authorities are that year. A box of Roman candles, a few dubious squibs, and maybe even a Catherine wheel nailed to the fence. Someone's uncle insists he knows exactly how to set them off safely, which means everyone else takes a generous step backward. The display is part beauty, part chaos. Rockets shriek, fountains splutter, and more than one firework tips over and careers through the crowd, sparking a stampede and a flurry of nervous laughter. The adults yell warnings and children scatter, only to circle back, giddy with the thrill of near-miss excitement. Despite the risk, and it's considerable, bonfires and fireworks are the heart of the Victorian Halloween night. The fire is mesmerizing, huge logs popping, sparks swirling up into the blackness, the air filled with the rich, unmistakable scent of burning wood and damp earth. Everyone gathers around, families, neighbors, the town busybody, even the stray dogs, all drawn to the warmth and the light. The event becomes an impromptu town meeting, a temporary truce in the ongoing cabbage wars. In between firework bursts, children roast anything they can get their hands on: apples, chestnuts, sometimes bread on a stick, sometimes a slightly charred sausage if someone's feeling extravagant. Tales of past Halloween nights are swapped. Warnings of don't get too close are largely ignored. And parents try to keep a head count of their offspring as they dart in and out of the shadows. At the night's peak, the bonfire roars tallest, casting enormous, dancing silhouettes against the houses and hedges. For a moment, the whole world feels both ancient and alive. A little dangerous, a little wild, and completely unforgettable. Eventually, the fire dies down, the last firework fizzles, and, miraculously, everyone leaves with their eyebrows intact. Bonfires and fireworks might have been technically frowned upon, or even illegal, depending on the town, but on Halloween in Victorian England, nobody seems to mind. It's one final burst of shared chaos before the cold and quiet settle in again. And for children and grown-ups alike, it's the brightest memory of the year. As the bonfire's last sparks fade and children's faces glow in the afterlight, Halloween night in Victorian England becomes a swirling cauldron of superstition. This is the hour when every old wives' tale comes alive, when a creaking floorboard might mean a ghost, and the family cat suddenly holds the fate of your immortal soul in its tiny, judgmental paws. Superstitions are the true backbone of Victorian Halloween. Every family, every street, has its own collection, handed down from grandmothers who always claimed to just know these things. Some superstitions are general, some deliciously local. All are designed to keep you safely on your toes, or just nervous enough to behave. At least until midnight. Black cats, for example, are everywhere, and their reputation is complicated. In some houses, spotting one on Halloween is good luck, provided it crosses your path from left to right and doesn't stop to glare at you. In others, a black cat means you'd better knock on wood, spit over your shoulder, and hope you didn't just invite 7 years of boils. Cats, being cats, play both sides, slinking in the shadows, accepting treats, and knocking over turnip lanterns at the worst possible moments. Mirrors, meanwhile, are not just for checking your costume. On Halloween night, they're portals, or at least that's what you've been told. If you dare to look into a mirror at midnight by candlelight, legend has it you'll see your future spouse's face, or a skull, or possibly the neighbor's cat again, depending on the angle and your nerves. Most children make it about 2 seconds before squealing and bolting from the room, convinced they saw a shadow, which is immediately added to the household's ongoing ghost tally. Death omens abound. Hear a dog howl at the moon. Someone in the neighborhood is doomed. Find a feather on your pillow? Sleep with one eye open. The bravest, or most foolish, children tell tales of seeing a winding sheet, the ghostly shroud of someone destined to die, folding itself at the foot of a bed. Even something as simple as an unexpected knock at the door after midnight is cause for alarm, though it's usually just a cousin hoping for leftover toffee. Then there are the classic Victorian warnings. Never sweep after dark, you'll sweep away your luck. Never leave shoes upside down, invites the devil. And never, under any circumstances, point at a graveyard from your window. If you do, you must immediately touch iron, or risk being followed home by something from the other side. All these rules are impossible to remember, which is probably the point. By the time you've sorted out which pocket holds your lucky penny and which door you haven't knocked on yet, you're too distracted to cause any real trouble. Superstitions extend to food, too. If you bite into an apple and find a worm, you're cursed, unless you quickly toss the core over your left shoulder and spin around 3 times. Cutting a cake into uneven pieces is said to invite household quarrels. Hence, every child claims their slice is just right, no matter how lopsided. As the hour grows late, parents stoke the fire. Adults swap increasingly spooky tales, and the youngest children inch closer to the hearth, eyes wide and ears full of warnings. The boundary between fun and fear blurs. You're not sure if you're excited, scared, or just cold. Halloween in Victorian England isn't only about tricks and treats. It's a night when the unknown creeps in and old beliefs take center stage. Every superstition, every nervous glance is just another way to bring the family closer. Because nothing unites a household like the possibility that the cat, the mirror, or the wind might be hiding something you can't quite explain. When the night's games are winding down and the bonfire is a glowing memory on your cheeks, there's one last tradition to enjoy. The legendary, slightly hazardous world of Victorian Halloween snacks. Forget store-bought sweets or neatly wrapped candy bars. Here, the treats are homemade, unpredictable, and guaranteed to stick in your teeth, or occasionally take one with them. First on every child's mind is treacle toffee. This is the king of Victorian Halloween confections. Dark, sticky, and best approached with a combination of respect and dental insurance. The process starts in the kitchen with a battered saucepan and the closest approximation of a recipe, which always includes generous guesses and an old spoon, treacle, sugar, a splash of vinegar, and a little butter are boiled until your mother insists the mixture smells right, or until the kitchen is filled with smoke and the windows have to be thrown open. Pouring out the toffee is an event. Children gather round the kitchen table as the glossy, bubbling syrup is spread onto a slab of slate, a baking sheet, or, in a pinch, the cleanest part of the kitchen counter. Everyone waits, fidgeting for the crucial moment. The smashing, with the family rolling pin or the back of a heavy spoon. The toffee is shattered into jagged, irregular shards. No two pieces alike. Each one a unique test of molar fortitude. Other snacks soon appear. There's parkin cake, dense and fragrant with ginger and treacle, served in crumbly squares that leave your fingers, and sometimes your shirt, sticky for hours. Roasted chestnuts make their rounds, doled out in old handkerchiefs, hot enough to burn your tongue if you're too eager. Occasionally, a bowl of burnt sugar candies appears, the result of someone's ambitious attempt at homemade sugar art. These treats range from golden brown to charred black, with flavors that can swing from delight to disaster in a single bite. The snacks are more than just food. They're a kind of edible storytelling. Each sticky treat is a link to family legend. The time the toffee set too quickly and nearly pulled out Uncle Albert's false teeth, or the year a burnt sugar sculpture melted, mid-story, into the fire. Siblings barter and swap, angling for the biggest piece of parkin or the corner chunk of toffee. Rivalries are fierce. A child might hide their extra chestnut in a pocket, only to rediscover it days later. Now, a fossilized relic. Of course, snacks double as fuel for the night's remaining mischief. With sugar surging through your veins, you're ready to dash into the dark, laugh at old superstitions, or brave the creaking attic in search of ghosts. Adults, meanwhile, enjoy the chance to sit by the fire, sipping tea or something stronger, and basking in the rare peace that comes with children distracted by dessert. Not all snacks are sweet. There's always a bowl of roasted seeds, pumpkin or sunflower if you're lucky, mixed if your family is thrifty and not too picky. The taste is salty, smoky, and a little bit burnt, but nobody complains. After a night spent ducking for nuts, bobbing for apples, and hurling cabbages, even the simplest snack tastes special, a reward for surviving another year of chaos. By the time the last piece of toffee is pried from your molars and the last crumb of parkin is claimed, the energy in the room has mellowed. You're tired, content, and a little sticky around the edges. The snacks may not be fancy, but they are unforgettable, just like Victorian Halloween itself. In a world before packaged treats, a handful of burnt sugar and a belly full of stories is the sweetest way to end the night. As Halloween night deepens, a strange divide opens up across Victorian England. A rift between town and countryside that's as wide as the nearest cabbage patch and as fierce as any rivalry between siblings. Urban and rural Halloween traditions may share the same spirit of mischief, but the style, scale, and soundtrack of their chaos couldn't be more different. In the city, the festivities are a noisy symphony of echoing footsteps, shouts, and laughter bouncing off rows of sooty brick houses. Gas lamps cast trembling shadows on the cobblestones, and the fog blurs the boundaries between child, ghost, and costumed cat burglar. Children rove in packs, darting from one stoop to another, door-knocking for treats, or plotting elaborate pranks that use the whole street as their playground. Mischief here is public and competitive. The most creative tricksters swap stories in the alleys, boasting about swapping Mrs. Featherstone's boots with Mr. Grubb's, or who managed to soap the most windows before the constable appeared. The city's cramped living and ever-watchful neighbours mean pranks are loud and fleeting. A dash of flour here, a cabbage there, and then a quick escape before anyone can get a good look. Urban bonfires are more likely to be makeshift affairs in vacant lots, built from broken chairs and mystery wood, watched by half the neighbourhood and disapproved by the other half. The highlight of City Halloween might be the collective gasp as someone's homemade firework takes off sideways, careening toward the grocer's shop. Laughter follows shrieks, and even the scoldings from grown-ups become part of the tradition. Rural Halloween, meanwhile, is a world apart, quieter, darker, and stretched across rolling fields and scattered cottages. The sounds are different. The crackle of real bonfires in open meadows, the distant hoot of an owl, the low murmur of families gathering close for warmth and company. Here, pranks are more elaborate, sometimes involving livestock. There's always a tale about last year's daring operation to move Old Man Bentley's prized goat to the church tower. With fewer people and more space, tricks linger longer. You might stumble upon a cabbage in your boot days later, or find the village signpost mysteriously pointing straight into the vicar's hedge. Rural traditions have their own charm and their own sense of danger. The darkness feels thicker, the superstitions stronger, and the boundaries between the living and the mysterious just a little bit thinner. Fortune-telling takes center stage in the farmhouse parlor, with more time for egg whites, candle drips, and whispered predictions by the fire. Bonfires here are taller and wilder, lighting up the countryside for miles around, and often crowned by an effigy, sometimes a scarecrow, sometimes a particularly unpopular turnip. Treats reflect their environment. Country children might munch apples plucked straight from the orchard, or chestnuts roasted in the ashes. City kids barter for a wedge of parkin or a chunk of treacle toffee, pilfered from kitchen windowsills and handed round in greasy paper. Both sides are convinced their version of Halloween is best, and both have stories to prove it. As the night wears on, the differences blur. Children fall asleep by the fire in farmhouse kitchens or city parlors, costumes in disarray and hands still sticky with burnt sugar. In the end, whether you're dodging the city constable or the village goose, Halloween in Victorian England is about mischief, stories, and that delicious thrill of getting away with something, no matter where you call home. So, as the bonfires die down and the last tricks are played, the debate continues. Town or country, which Halloween reigns supreme? The answer, as any Victorian child would tell you, depends on where you wake up in the morning and how many cabbages you find in your bed. As the clock ticks closer to midnight and the streets grow quiet, save for the odd echo of distant laughter or a stray cabbage rolling in the gutter, there's a hush that settles over the house. It's the hour when, if you're lucky, or perhaps a bit unlucky, you're invited to a Halloween sleepover, complete with the most thrilling ritual of all, the Victorian séance. Victorian England was famously obsessed with the supernatural. Everyone from the Queen to the chimney sweep's apprentice seemed convinced that the dead could communicate, especially on nights like this. So when a group of children, sufficiently sugared up, exhausted, and desperate to prove their bravery, gathers in the parlor or attic, the séance begins. The setup is as eerie as it is earnest. Blankets are spread on the floor, and someone produces a rickety table or upended crate. The room is lit by the soft, trembling glow of candles, carefully arranged so the shadows dance in just the right way to make everyone question the wisdom of this enterprise. Each child grabs a hand, forming a solemn circle, while one self-appointed medium calls for silence and commands the room with a voice that's half mocking, half terrified. Spirits of Halloween, we invite you, the leader intones, eyebrows waggling with a mix of drama and nerves. Sometimes a homemade talking board appears, with letters chalked onto scrap paper, and a planchette fashioned from a saucer or a slice of turnip. Other times, the medium relies on the classic Victorian method, the overturned glass, trembling as a dozen nervous fingers barely touch its rim. With every creak, every gust of wind, the group jumps and whispers, sure that Aunt Mildred's ghost is about to make her opinion known about the missing silverware. There's an etiquette to these seances. First, you must never let go of each other's hands, unless, of course, you need to grab the cat, who always manages to insert itself into the middle of the circle at exactly the wrong moment. Second, no laughing, at least not until the medium accidentally burps or someone's elbow knocks over a candle, sending half the group scrambling for safety. Invariably, someone asks for a sign, a tap, a sigh, or a mysterious cold breeze. Most of the time, it's nothing more than the draft from the window. But there's always that one moment when the candle sputters or the table trembles, and everyone's eyes go wide. Sometimes the saucer moves, spelling out nonsense, or the planchette drifts towards the yes, prompting shrieks and accusations of cheating or of being possessed, which is even better for sleepover legend status. The bravest, or most foolish, child inevitably asks the spirits a question. Who will get married first? Will I be rich? Is Old Man Jenkins really a werewolf? The answers, if any, are garbled, vague, or suspiciously self-serving. Someone's older cousin swears they once got a message from the other side, though it sounded an awful lot like Uncle Herbert with a dish towel over his head. But it's not about the answers. It's about the delicious, spine-tingling suspense, the way every breath feels electric, every giggle quickly stifled, every creak a possible message from beyond. For a moment, everyone in the circle believes, or wants to believe, that the veil between worlds is thin, and that the night is full of mysteries just waiting to be discovered. By the time the candles burn low and the parents knock on the door, everyone's heart is pounding with excitement, nerves, and a little regret at all the burnt sugar eaten earlier. Whether or not the spirits actually visited, everyone has a story to tell, and a Halloween memory that lingers long after the sun rises on November 1st. Halloween in Victorian England is supposed to be about ghosts, mischief, and things that go bump in the night, but somewhere in between the bonfires and bobbing for apples, something softer sneaks in. Romance, shy and awkward, arrives like a draft through a cracked window, and suddenly Halloween becomes the perfect night for candlelit crushes and blushing dares. It starts innocently enough. There's a certain thrill in wearing costumes, hiding behind a soot-smudged mask or a tattered shawl, and pretending, just for an evening, that you're someone else. Victorian kids, normally bound by strict manners and an endless list of do's and don'ts, find freedom in disguise. The bravest boys put on an extra-large hat or a ragged cloak, declare themselves highwaymen or vampires, and use the night's mischief as an excuse to show off a little. Girls, meanwhile, giggle over makeshift fortune-telling rituals, accidentally pair up for apple snapping, and trade glances across crowded parlors. Candlelight helps. Shadows flicker on the walls. Everyone looks a bit mysterious, and the rules of the everyday are loosened just enough to allow a little flirting. If you're clever, you'll arrange to walk with your favorite companion from house to house, using the excuse of safety in numbers. Maybe you'll hold the same turnip lantern or take turns daring each other to knock on the scariest doors. There are classic Victorian games designed to nudge romance along. The parlor fills with laughter as apple seeds are pressed to foreheads or nuts are named and tossed into the fire. If your nut burns strong and bright, your love is true. If it pops or fizzles, expect teasing for weeks. Partners are chosen for apple snapping. Hands brush as you reach for the same treat. And for a fleeting moment, there's something sweeter than toffee in the air. Fortune-telling reaches its peak here. Girls line up to peel apples in a single spiral, then toss the peel over their shoulder, hoping it lands in the shape of a sweetheart's initial. Boys sneak glances, hoping their own name might appear in the curl. If the group is feeling bold, someone might attempt the mirror trick, gazing into a candlelit looking-glass at midnight to see a glimpse of their future beloved. The bravest claim to see a face and blush scarlet when pressed for details. Outside, the night is alive with opportunity for secret gestures. a cabbage tossed playfully at a crush's feet, a daring hand squeeze as you dart across a garden, or a whispered joke shared in the dark. All around, the rules are relaxed. Siblings don't tease quite as much, parents are busy with bonfires, and the line between friendship and something more is as hazy as the autumn fog. Of course, no one would call it dating. That's much too modern, much too bold. Victorian romance is a game of hints, glances, and dares. It's the joy of discovering that the person you like saved you the biggest piece of parkin, or let you win at ducking for nuts. Well, almost. In a world where so much is restricted and chaperoned, a night like this feels like a stolen breath of possibility. By the time the lanterns flicker low and children are herded home, those little moments linger. A borrowed shawl, a shared slice of treacle toffee, the memory of a laugh in the dark. These are the beginnings of stories that will be whispered for weeks and remembered for years. Halloween, for all its spookiness, is also a night for gentle hope. In the gentle, dancing glow of candlelight, romance finds a way, even if, come morning, everyone pretends it never happened. Eventually, the sweets are gone. The lanterns flicker low, and the last bonfire embers collapse into the night. It's time for that most overlooked, most desperately awaited moment in the Victorian Halloween saga, bedtime. You would think, after a night spent running wild through shadowy streets, dodging cabbages, and whispering ghost stories, sleep would come easily. But in a drafty Victorian bedroom, every creak is suspect, every shadow a potential ghost, and every bedsheet a possible hiding place for someone else's leftover turnip. First, there's the ritual of getting ready. Costumes come off in a flurry of buttons, knots, and sibling bickering. The soot from your Phantom of the Alley disguise leaves perfect handprints on your face and streaks on the wash basin, which your mother will scold you about in the morning. Woolen stockings and itchy shirts are peeled off with relief, tossed into a communal laundry pile that grows more ominous every day. If you're lucky, your nightshirt has been warming by the fire. If not, you brace yourself and pull on something that's as cold and unyielding as the tombstone in the churchyard. Climbing into bed in a Victorian home is an adventure all its own. The mattress sags, the pillow is lumpy, and the sheets are so cold they practically squeak. Siblings crowd together, sometimes for comfort, sometimes just for warmth. And there is always one who claims the bed nearest the wall is haunted. The bravest among you scoff, but even they keep their toes well covered. There's a strange comfort in sleeping side by side with your brothers and sisters, each wrapped up in scratchy blankets and the comforting aroma of burnt sugar, cabbage, and the outdoors. Outside, the wind rattles the window panes, and the last traces of bonfire smoke drift through the gaps in the glass. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howls, setting off a round of shivers and more than a few whispered prayers. You pull your blanket tighter, willing yourself to ignore the sounds. If you're unlucky, someone's turnip lantern still glows in the corner, casting monstrous, wobbling shadows that seem determined to crawl right up the walls. The post-Halloween jitters hit hard. Every sound, a groan from the rafters, a scuttle in the eaves, the gentle breathing of your sister, could be a ghost, a mouse, or a particularly energetic cabbage. You want to drift off, but your mind is alive with images from the night. Bobbing for apples, stories of haunted attics, the daring of a midnight fortune teller. Did you really see something in the mirror? Was that chill just the draft, or the ghost of Cousin Thomas coming to claim his lost sock? Still, the excitement fades. Your eyelids grow heavy. The exhaustion of a long night finally catches up, and the strange, anxious magic of Halloween gives way to the slow tide of sleep. The last thing you hear before drifting off might be the soft murmur of your parents downstairs, or the snort of the family dog as it settles by the hearth. Maybe, just maybe, you'll dream of adventure, romance, or a world where the bed is always warm and the cabbages stay outside. And so, in the cold, creaking darkness of a Victorian bedroom, you find yourself surrounded by family, comforted by the memories of laughter, a belly full of strange snacks, and the certain knowledge that, even if ghosts are real, they can't possibly be scarier than a sibling with cold feet. Halloween ends, not with a scream or a fright, but with the deep, peaceful sleep of a child who knows they survived the spookiest, silliest night of the year. When dawn finally breaks on November 1st, it's not with the soft glow of new beginnings, but with a chorus of groans, sneezes, and the unmistakable sound of a parent stepping squarely into something damp and suspicious. The morning after Victorian Halloween is less about peaceful reflection and more about taking stock of what survived, what was lost, and how many cabbages now occupy places cabbages were never meant to go. The house awakens slowly, and no one is eager to leave the warmth of their bed. Sleep was uneasy, full of restless dreams about turnip lanterns and mysterious shadows. You're groggy, stiff, and still wearing a streak of soot across your forehead from last night's costume. Eventually, though, hunger and curiosity draw you out. The hallway is cold and strangely silent, save for the distant clatter of someone cleaning up broken crockery. Your first real glimpse of the aftermath comes in the parlor. Every surface tells a story. The fireplace is choked with ashes and a few leftover roasted chestnuts. The remains of the treacle toffee are stuck stubbornly to the edge of the table, and someone's parkin has been flattened underfoot, likely in the middle of a late-night ghost chase. There's a mysterious puddle near the window. You hope it's water. You're not going to ask. It doesn't take long to discover that the house is not the only casualty. The outside world is a carnival of chaos. The front steps are littered with the debris of Halloween. Cabbage leaves, a squashed apple, the faint outline of a flower handprint, and, inexplicably, the family cat wearing a turnip lantern as a helmet. Across the yard, the washing line has been restrung with socks and someone's knickers. No one is sure whose, and no one wants to claim them. The older children are dispatched to investigate the broader neighborhood. Reports trickle in like war news. The Smiths next door have a cabbage in every flower pot. Old Mrs. Higginbotham is in high dudgeon about footprints on her prized pumpkins. A group of younger children insists they saw a real ghost in the privy, though it's probably just the neighbor's nightgown blowing in the wind. The local constable surveys the scene with a sigh, chalking up another year of unfortunate incidents for his ledger. Breakfast is a more subdued affair. Gone is the excitement of soul cakes and tea sweets. In its place is a round of tea and bread, eaten in the resigned silence of those recovering from both sugar and chaos. Parents grumble as they scrub the remnants of treacle off the good tablecloth and try to coax the family dog out from under the sofa. Children swap stories of close calls, near misses with flying turnips, the narrow escape from Mrs. Puddlewick's bucket of water, or the bold cousin who survived the séance with his dignity mostly intact. There is a strange kind of satisfaction in the mess. The morning after Halloween is a badge of honor, a sign that, for one wild night, mischief triumphed, pranks were perfected, and the bonds of family and neighborhood were tested and, somehow, strengthened. Even the parents, as they sweep up ashes and pluck stray vegetables from the gutters, have to smile. They remember their own wild nights, their own cabbage wars, and the thrill of waking up to the aftermath. Soon enough, life resumes its usual routine. The house is righted, the laundry is done, and the last hints of soot and sugar are washed away. But for one magical, chaotic morning, everyone shares in the collective exhaustion and quiet triumph of another Halloween survived. By midday on November 1st, the magical haze of Halloween has faded, replaced by the slow ache of real life settling back in. The house, still heavy with the scent of burnt sugar and wood smoke, is quieter than usual. The chaos of the previous night lingers in the oddest corners. a sticky doorknob here, a wilted cabbage leaf there. But now, everyone is too tired to wage further battle. It's time to pay the price for a night of wild, exuberant mischief. Children stumble into the morning like survivors of a particularly soggy adventure. Costumes are nowhere to be found. Instead, you're wrapped in whatever blanket was nearest, hair tousled and feet dragging. There's a heaviness in your limbs from too many treats, not enough sleep, and a fair share of running from imaginary ghosts. Siblings who were allies and rivals in last night's pranks now form a silent truce, gathered around the breakfast table, eyes half shut and voices soft. Breakfast is a subdued affair. Gone are the soul cakes and the anticipation of sweets. In their place are thick slices of bread, cool tea, and the gentle creak of chairs. Parents speak in low tones, reviewing the damage. Who's cleaning up the cabbage? Has anyone seen the cat? What happened to the good candlesticks? The laughter is softer, but no less genuine. And even the sternest father can't quite keep a smile from his lips at the memory of last night's spectacle. As chores resume, everyone moves a little slower. Children are sent outside to gather up stray lanterns, unstring laundry from unlikely places, and remove the last traces of soaked windows and chalked messages from garden gates. You mutter about unfairness, but deep down, you relish the ritual, the chance to swap stories, to relive the best tricks, and to find out who left the cabbage in Mrs. Featherstone's boots. There's a sense of camaraderie in the cleanup, as if the neighborhood collectively understands the unspoken pact of Halloween. Chaos is temporary, but the memories last. The parents, though grumbling, find themselves sharing tales of their own childhood misadventures, admitting, quietly, that they once swapped the vicar's hat for a pumpkin or started the first cabbage wars decades ago. Tradition is a stubborn thing, and Halloween, for all its chaos, is one of the few nights where rules are bent, stories are born, and even the grumpiest grown-ups remember how it feels to be a little wild. By afternoon, the world outside seems almost normal again. The last turnip lantern has burned out. The bonfire is nothing more than a charred ring on the grass, and the family cat, newly liberated from its vegetable helmet, resumes its duties of ignoring everyone in favor of napping by the hearth. School books are opened, chores finished, and the talk shifts from pranks to lessons, from tricks to the practical matters of life in Victorian England. But something lingers, a kind of quiet satisfaction that you were part of something unruly and extraordinary. For one night, you defied the ordinary, braved the dark, and made memories sticky enough to last all year. And even as the grown-ups sweep up the last crumbs and the children drift back into their routines, there's already talk of what to do next Halloween. Who will find the best cabbage? Who will dare the boldest trick? The countdown has already begun. And so, with a final glance at the garden, still not quite cabbage-free, you settle back into life, heart lighter for having survived the chaos, and mind already plotting next year's mischief. Halloween is over. Life resumes. But the story will be told again and again, every time someone finds a turnip seed in their shoe. In the romantic haze of Halloween night, it's easy to forget one of the most persistent, least poetic realities of Victorian childhood, the constant battle against the itch. No matter how thrilling the pranks, how sweet the toffee, or how spine-tingling the ghost stories, underneath it all is a relentless enemy, lice. And, as if that weren't enough, everything you wear is made of wool, so scratchy it could be used for cleaning pots. Let's be honest. By October, you and your siblings are already veterans of the autumn itch. The arrival of colder weather means layering up, And in the world of Victorian England, layering up means wool. Thick stockings, bulky jumpers, undershirts, scarves, every piece of clothing seems designed to trap both warmth and every crawling critter in the neighborhood. There's no central heating, no synthetic blends, and absolutely no escape. Halloween only makes it worse. After an evening spent running through damp fields, squeezing into cramped parlors, and wrestling in the dark with siblings over the last chunk of treacle toffee, everyone's sweaters feel twice as prickly and suspiciously alive. Costumes cobbled together from the family rag pile don't help, especially when someone's witch cloak is actually an old horse blanket or a hand-me-down survived a decade's worth of infestations. It's hard to look menacing when you're scratching behind your ear every few seconds, or when your ghost sheet leaves you itching in places you didn't even know you had. There's also the ever-present paranoia. One sibling scratching means a family-wide inspection is coming. Mother declares a knit night, and everyone is lined up, scalp by scalp, under the unforgiving glow of the kitchen lamp. Out comes the dreaded comb, an instrument so fine-toothed and merciless it might as well be called the Victorian Inquisition. Oil or vinegar is dabbed on hair and scalps, followed by a round of combing that feels only slightly less traumatic than public humiliation. The unlucky are quarantined in a special chair, sometimes with a scarf tied dramatically around their head, as if they've just survived a plague. Wool, meanwhile, is an equal opportunity tormentor. You itch when you put it on, you itch when you sweat through it bobbing for apples, and you itch even more when you peel it off, only to discover a rash that looks suspiciously like a map of the British Empire. Halloween night is a parade of children furiously scratching under layers of scarves, hats, and hastily constructed costumes. Ghosts don't scare you. Dry, irritated skin and mysterious red welts do. Sometimes, misery loves company. You trade horror stories with friends who had the worst case, who found the biggest louse, who got away with only a mild rash. Some families swear by homemade remedies, a rub of camphor, a vinegar rinse, or simply toughing it out. Meanwhile, the family dog gets a thorough check, as if the poor beast is the source of all evil, and the cat wisely disappears until the fuss is over. Yet, in the great tapestry of Victorian Halloween, the itch is more than a nuisance. It's a rite of passage. If you emerge from the night with only a few fresh bites and a manageable rash, you count yourself lucky. You wear your woolen stripes and scratchy scars with a kind of pride, knowing that real courage isn't braving ghosts or mischief, but surviving Halloween in Victorian underwear. So as you lie in bed, the echo of laughter and ghost stories fading, your final Halloween companion is the soft, persistent itch. You scratch, sigh, and pull your blanket tighter, knowing that, in the Victorian world, the itch is just as much a part of the story as any flying cabbage or haunted lantern. With Halloween chaos at its peak and bonfire smoke still curling through the air, there's only one thing left for a pack of Victorian children determined to stretch out the night. A legendary game of hide and seek. But this isn't the tidy version played in a well-lit drawing room. This is hide and seek, Victorian style, where the rules are as murky as the weather and the London fog is thick enough to swallow you whole. The perfect playground for this game is the street itself. Fog rolling between gas lamps, doorways half lit, and the distant sound of laughter and fading footsteps echoing off the bricks. Every bush, barrel, and alleyway becomes a possible hiding spot, and the boundary between reality and ghost story blurs in the low, shivering light. The seeker is chosen, often the youngest, or the one who lost at apple snapping, stands in the middle of the cobblestones and counts loudly, hands pressed over their eyes as the world vanishes into grey mist. You and your friends scatter, hearts thumping, as the count rises. The thrill of the chase is amplified by the otherworldly atmosphere. The fog transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. A laundry line is suddenly a haunted gallows, a pile of discarded crates looks like a witch's den, and every shadow seems to twitch and shift. The only sound is the squelch of boots and the muffled giggles of those not yet found. Hiding is half the fun, half a battle against nerves. Some children squeeze into the tiniest corners, behind the coal pile, under a wooden cart, or inside a neighbor's shed that smells distinctly of onions and mystery. Others choose bold, risky spots. Behind the vicar's statue, crouched in the hedgerow, or pressed flat against a cold, damp wall, breath held tight, hoping no one hears the frantic thump of their heart. The fog is both ally and enemy. It hides you from the seeker, but it hides the seeker from you too. Every approaching footstep sends a jolt of excitement and terror up your spine. Maybe it's your best friend, maybe it's the seeker, or maybe it's just old Mrs. Pringle, muttering about hooligans from the depths of the mist. Nobody really knows. Meanwhile, the seeker stumbles, calling out names, arms outstretched, shuffling carefully so as not to slip on the slick cobblestones. The rules are simple. Tag anyone you find, and their loud shriek signals victory. But sometimes, the seeker gets spooked by a swinging lantern or a cat darting across the path, prompting an accidental detour and a nervous laugh. Each round ends with a triumphant parade of found children, faces flushed and damp, and at least one person who managed to disappear so completely they have to be lured back with a bribe of leftover parkin. Hide and seek in the fog is more than just a game. It's a test of courage and creativity, a way to squeeze every last ounce of fun from Halloween night. The city becomes a living, breathing maze, where every hiding place feels like a secret, every corner a new adventure. And in those moments of waiting, breathless, half-hidden, the fog curling around you, you truly understand why Victorian ghost stories begin with a child in the mist. Eventually, the game ends as the fog thickens or parents call you inside. Threatening early bedtime or extra chores, you re-emerge from the shadows, triumphant or discovered, muddy and grinning, hearts still racing. The great Victorian hide-and-seek is over for another year, but the memory lingers, half adventure, half legend, forever wrapped in the mysteries of Halloween night. Every Victorian Halloween has its fair share of ghost stories and pranks, but nothing adds more flavor to the night than a good, old-fashioned bout of sibling sabotage. In a world of crowded bedrooms, shared woolen socks, and family heirlooms that double as costume pieces, rivalry among brothers and sisters is practically the main event. Forget the neighbors. Your real adversaries are under the same roof. It starts before the first soul cake is handed out. Someone hides your mask, claiming it was blown away by the wind. Your best scarf, reserved for your pirate costume, is suddenly wrapped around the family cat, who looks less like a fearsome beast and more like it's plotting its own revenge. You retaliate by putting a cold, boiled potato in your sister's boots, an act of war in the chilly months of October. Once the festivities kick off, every activity becomes an opportunity for sabotage. During apple bobbing, an older brother might nudge the tub just as you go in for a bite, ensuring a faceful of water. When it's time for the fortune-telling games, siblings jostle to shout out embarrassing predictions. You'll marry the baker's son and have 10 children, prompting shrieks, giggles, and the kind of blushing rage that only a family can inspire. Trick or treating together is a delicate operation. The oldest always claims the biggest lantern or the prime position at the front door, leaving the youngest to trail behind and negotiate for leftovers. When you finally get a rare treat, an extra chunk of parkin or a hard-won roasted chestnut, you guard it with your life. Because sharing is an ideal more often preached than practiced. Costume creation is a nightly battlefield. Someone's cloak is mysteriously missing an armhole. A witch's hat turns up with the point flattened and pinned with a laundry peg. Your attempt at a vampire cape is intercepted and transformed into an emergency ghost sheet by your little brother, who insists that ghosts are scarier anyway. Muttered threats, stolen pins, and last-minute sewing disasters are all part of the fun. If you want your costume to survive the night, you'd better keep it on. Or sleep with one eye open. The worst offenses are saved for the ghost hunt and bedtime. Nothing says I love you like sneaking a cold cabbage into a sibling's blanket. Or waiting until the lights are out to whisper, "Did you hear that noise in the attic?" Some go even further, carefully tying the ends of bedsheets together or hiding a turnip lantern under the bed for a delayed midnight scare. Laughter echoes through the house, punctuated by shouts, scolding, and the inevitable parental threats of no pudding for a week if you don't settle down. But even in the thick of competition, there's a secret unity to it all. Sibling sabotage is both weapon and shield. When an outsider tries to outprank the family, the rivals instantly become allies, joining forces to defend the home, the candy stash, and family honor. If someone outside the house dares to tease your little sister or snatch your brother's lantern, you rally together, forgetting all grievances, at least until the outsider is sent packing. As the night winds down and the last prank is played, you find yourself sharing a blanket, swapping stories, and dividing the leftover sweets under the covers. For all the tricks and petty betrayals, you wouldn't trade your saboteur siblings for all the parking in England. Family feuds may last a day, but the legends of Halloween night will be recounted, exaggerated, and laughed over for a lifetime. As the sun finally rises after Halloween night, the aftermath of the previous evening's chaos becomes fully, hilariously apparent. For one Victorian family in particular, the annual tradition of Cabbage Night takes a shocking turn, not because of the cabbages hurled at neighbors' doors, but because the entire family cabbage cart has vanished. In the cold, pale light of morning, it's not just your dignity you're searching for. It's the wooden cart your father swore was absolutely secure behind the shed. The first to notice is usually the person tasked with retrieving a fresh cabbage for breakfast. Their confused shouts rouse the household, and soon the kitchen window is crowded with tousled heads peering into the yard. Where there was once a trusty cart piled with bruised, leftover vegetables, there is now only a set of muddy tracks leading off into the unknown. The family cat, perched on the fence, surveys the scene with an air of judgment, as if to say, "I warned you this would happen." At first, suspicion falls on the usual suspects. Siblings point fingers. Was it the eldest brother, who last year tried to build a makeshift sledge out of the cart and nearly ended up in the village pond? Or perhaps the twins, notorious for hiding anything not nailed down, especially if it's big enough to use as a fort? The family dog is interrogated, offered a sniff of last night's cabbage, and ultimately exonerated when it rolls over and goes back to sleep. But soon, the plot thickens. Reports trickle in from neighbouring houses. The Smiths found a single cabbage in their coal scuttle. The Higginbothams awoke to discover their garden gnome perched atop a cartwheel, arms full of turnip lanterns. Even old Mrs. Peabody, who prides herself on being unprankable, found her prize marrows neatly lined up beside her rain barrel, looking suspiciously smug. Speculation turns into a community-wide investigation. Children take up the role of pint-sized detectives, retracing the muddy tracks and piecing together the puzzle with the seriousness of Scotland Yard, albeit with more giggling and fewer magnifying glasses. Suspects are cross-examined. Did anyone see a group of mysterious figures moving through the fog last night? Was that really Cousin George sneaking past the privy? Or just a very fat raccoon? As the search widens, rumours spread. Some claim the cabbage cart was taken by a rival family, eager to settle an old score from last year's flower fight. Others whisper that it was the work of mischievous spirits, displeased by a particularly poor ghost story told at midnight. The adults, caught between amusement and irritation, remind everyone that last year it was the wheelbarrow, and we still haven't found the second-best rake. Eventually, the cart is discovered in the most unlikely place. Parked squarely in front of the village church, draped in bunting and overflowing with cabbages, turnips, and a truly heroic quantity of mud. There's a note attached, written in wobbly handwriting, declaring the cart winner of the grand Halloween vegetable derby. The villagers gather, laugh, and agree that the prize for next year's prank war has just been raised. By midday, the cart is wheeled home, slightly worse for wear, but with its legend firmly established. The story of the missing cabbage cart becomes a new family favorite, retold with ever more dramatic embellishments as the years go on. In Victorian England, the best Halloweens are measured not by how little gets lost, but by how epic the search is to get it back. And as the cabbages are finally returned to their rightful, if humble place, everyone agrees. This mystery, like all the best Halloween tales, will last far longer than the cleanup. As the sun sinks and the evening quiet returns, the final tradition of Victorian Halloween unfolds. A family debriefing that's half confession, half comedy show, and wholly necessary for life to return to normal. By this point, everyone is weary from pranks and sugar. Costumes have been replaced by nightshirts, and the only thing left to do is gather by the fire, recount the night's escapades, and pass around cups of tea, or whatever's left of the festive cider. It begins with a hesitant laugh or a guilty glance. Someone breaks the ice, admitting, "I was the one who filled the boots with cold porridge," or "That cabbage in Mrs. Puddlewick's mailbox? Guilty." This opens the floodgates. Children and adults alike take turns sharing what they did, especially the pranks they pulled off without getting caught. It's a rare moment of honesty, protected by the unspoken rule. What's confessed after Halloween stays in the parlor. The mood is light, but every confession is accompanied by a round of friendly groans or theatrical gasps. The older siblings roll their eyes at the younger ones' clumsy attempts at sabotage. Parents pretend to scold, but their eyes twinkle with amusement. Sometimes, a particularly bold admission, a secret turnip swap, a daring rescue of the missing cabbage cart, earns a round of applause or a dramatic reenactment, everyone joining in to relive the funniest, most ridiculous moments. Yet, beneath the laughter, there's a little twinge of regret. Maybe you pushed your prank a bit too far, soaked your sister's socks one time too many, or left a turnip lantern burning a bit too long in the window. Perhaps someone's feelings were hurt in the rush to get the last slice of parkin, or you realize you forgot to save a soul cake for the neighbor who always shares his apples. The confessions become a gentle lesson in where fun ends and kindness begins. Then come the silent judgments. The family cat sits in the corner, tail twitching, eyes narrowed, as if keeping score of every prank and act of mischief. Adults exchange knowing looks about which child will be tasked with the worst chores tomorrow. Even the dog, normally happy-go-lucky, seems to give a little side-eye to anyone who admits to hiding sausages in his bed. But these judgments are soft and short-lived. What matters is the feeling of togetherness, the knowledge that, for one night, everyone played their part in the great, sprawling story of Halloween. Rivalries fade, replaced by inside jokes and tales of minor triumphs. A spilled bowl of nuts becomes a legendary disaster. The quest for the missing cabbage cart becomes a heroic epic. Even the small disappointments, like missing out on a favorite treat or being spooked by a sibling's prank, are softened in the glow of shared laughter. As the fire burns low and eyelids droop, the last round of confessions peters out. Someone mumbles a promise to do better next year. Someone else is already plotting a new trick. The evening ends not with punishment, but with a sense of forgiveness and family. Each person grateful, in their own way, to belong to such a strange, mischievous, and loving household. Victorian Halloween isn't just about fear, tricks, and sweets. It's about the art of coming together, telling the truth, laughing at yourself, and learning when to say sorry. And as the room falls quiet and the family cat finally curls up in the warmest lap, you realize the best stories aren't about pranks at all. They're about making memories, forgiving small failures, and, above all, being part of something worth coming home to. So, as the embers die down and the last turnip lantern flickers out, let's take a moment to appreciate just how far we've come and just how much Victorian children endured for the sake of a little fun, a few pranks, and a pocketful of soot. Halloween night in the 19th century was more than a holiday. It was a sprawling, muddy, absurd endurance test for kids with imaginations as big as their appetites.